On October 23, 2009, a 15-year-old girl led police officers deep into a forest near St. Martin's, Missouri. With swift movements, she showed them exactly what they were looking for: a well, one that she had dug herself. This confirmed for the police that what she had written in her diary was more than just the product of a teenage imagination. What they found left them utterly shocked. They struggled to comprehend the sheer malice that had driven this young girl to such an act. It was hard to believe that someone so young could be consumed by such dark impulses. Alyssa Bustamante was born on January 28, 1994, in Cole, Missouri. Her arrival was far from planned. Her parents, Cesar Bustamante and Michelle Brock, were teenagers struggling with addiction issues and were unprepared for the responsibilities of parenthood, as they could barely manage their own lives. When Alyssa was still very young, her mother faced arrests on two separate occasions, once for drug possession and another time for driving under the influence. Though they had little interest in raising a child, the couple went on to have 3 more children, twins and a little girl named Emma. Over time, Michelle's legal troubles continued, but it wasn't just the law that kept her away from her children. Eventually, she decided that she no longer wanted to be a mother and left, never to see Alyssa or her other children again. Cesar, now solely responsible for the children, also had a troubled path. In 2002, when Alyssa was 7, he was convicted of assault and sentenced to 10 years in prison. With both parents out of the picture, Alyssa and her siblings were placed under the custody of their maternal grandparents, Gary and Karen Brock. The children moved to St. Martin's, Missouri, where their lives took a drastic turn. Karen, a devoted Mormon, aimed to guide her grandchildren along a disciplined and structured path. She established strict rules for the household, including mandatory church attendance every Sunday. This approach worked relatively well for Emma and the twins, but Alyssa proved to be more resistant. As Alyssa entered her teenage years, her behavior worsened. By 13, she had become withdrawn, preferring to keep to herself and avoid others. Behind her tough exterior, however, Alyssa was deeply hurt, leading her to begin self-harming with razor blades on her arms. On September 3, 2007, her grandparents found her in the bathroom, bleeding. She had carved the word "hate" into her abdomen and taken an overdose of Tylenol. Karen and Gary rushed her to the nearest hospital. Once her physical condition was stabilized, they sought help from a psychiatrist. Alyssa was diagnosed with depression and bipolar disorder, and she was prescribed Prozac, but her mental health showed little improvement. With access to social media, Alyssa began to embrace and broadcast her rebellious personality. She shared posts with dark quotes, posed with deep red lipstick mimicking blood, and styled her eyes with exaggerated eyeliner, often showing her teeth in an attempt to intimidate followers. Her interest in dark themes wasn't just an act. She wanted the world to know what she was capable of, and she often involved her younger siblings in her expressions of rebellion. She created a YouTube account and her bio read, "I like cutting myself and killing people." Not long after, she uploaded a video titled "Electrocuted by Electric Fence" with a chilling description. Here's where it gets good. This is when my brothers get hurt. The video showed Alyssa coaxing her 9-year-old twin brothers into holding onto an electric fence meant for livestock. As the boys writhed in pain, Alyssa could be heard laughing in the background. Outside her home, Alyssa's behavior was no less troubling. She had conflicts with classmates and teachers, and she continued to harm herself, sometimes with cigarettes and other times by carving scars into her skin, a count that reportedly reached over 300. By age 15, her disturbing personality had reached its peak. During a party, she told a friend that she was curious about what it would feel like to take a life. Her friend dismissed it, assuming it was just an attention-seeking comment. Just days after her last psychiatrist visit, Alyssa's medication dosage was increased, but it wasn't enough to keep her inner turmoil at bay. On her Twitter account, Alyssa shared haunting thoughts about addiction and nightmares, once posting, "All I want in life is a reason for all this pain." She was reaching out for help, and perhaps if she had received it, the tragedy that unfolded might have been prevented. On Wednesday, October 21st, 2009, around 5 p.m., Emma, Alyssa's 6-year-old sister, knocked on the door of her friend Elizabeth Olten's house, inviting her over to play. Elizabeth, who was 9 years old, hesitated. Her mother, Patricia "Patty" Price, was preparing dinner, and her brothers, Anthony and Stephen Olten, were practicing songs for a school event. Despite the timing, Emma's eagerness convinced Elizabeth to ask her mom if she could go out for a little while. Patty agreed, under 2 conditions. Elizabeth had to return before dark and take her cell phone with her. Happy with the plan, Elizabeth joined Emma, and they walked the short distance to her house, just 4 blocks away. As the evening progressed and daylight faded, Patricia became worried when Elizabeth didn't come back on time. She called her daughter's phone but got no answer, which alarmed her further. She then went to Emma's house to speak with her grandparents. Karen told Patricia that she hadn't seen Elizabeth all day. Growing increasingly distressed, Patricia continued calling her daughter's phone, but each time it went to voicemail. With fear mounting, Patricia decided to report Elizabeth missing at the police station, and the search began immediately. Officers combed the neighborhood, but there was no sign of Elizabeth. By 11 p.m., news of the missing girl had spread, and many volunteers joined the search. Officers at the station tried tracing Elizabeth's cell phone signal, discovering that it was still nearby, somewhere in the wooded area between her home and Emma's house. This discovery puzzled Patricia, as Elizabeth was terrified of the woods and would never have ventured there on her own, especially in the dark. The FBI joined the search effort, deploying specialized dogs and even divers to search the nearest river, but they found no trace of Elizabeth. Then, some volunteers stumbled upon what appeared to be a freshly dug hole among the trees. It was large enough to fit a person, yet when police arrived to inspect it, the hole was empty, leaving them with more questions than answers. Returning to square one, the police decided to interview Emma, the last person known to have seen Elizabeth. Emma grew nervous but eventually admitted that, while playing in the woods, Elizabeth had gotten tangled in some thorn bushes. Emma ran home to ask Alyssa for help and then hadn't seen her friend again after that. With this new information, investigators turned their attention to Alyssa. They discovered that she had skipped school the day before Elizabeth's disappearance, an unusual absence given her spotless attendance record. When questioned at the station, Alyssa appeared calm and composed. Instead of asking her directly about Elizabeth, officers inquired about the strange hole found in the woods. Alyssa claimed she had dug it herself, explaining it was meant to bury dead animals. This response only deepened the investigators' concerns. That same day, police obtained a warrant to search Alyssa's room, where they uncovered disturbing details. Her walls were covered in sketches and phrases, some seemingly drawn in what looked like blood. Among the writings was a chilling statement. "I cut to make physical what I feel inside. I cut to see blood because I like it." The room also contained letters from her father in prison, but nothing immediately connected her to a crime until they noticed something else. A drawing with Emma, written in red, stood out. This made detectives wonder if Alyssa might harbor violent intentions toward her sister and had chosen Elizabeth as an easier target instead. The final piece fell into place when they found her diary. Inside, Alyssa had written disturbing confessions, including a desire to burn down a house with all its occupants inside. On the last page, a date was scribbled, October 21st, 2009, the exact day Elizabeth vanished. Beneath the date, two barely legible words seemed to say "throat" and "cut." Forensic experts worked to recover the full text, while detectives called Alyssa back to the station for further questioning, sensing she was hiding something. This time, Alyssa appeared even more at ease. Investigators didn't hold back, mentioning what they had read in her diary. Cornered, Alyssa finally spoke, but what she revealed left them in shock. Alyssa claimed that Elizabeth had died, but according to her, it was an accident. She had simply fallen in the woods. The officers didn't buy Alyssa's story. Locking eyes with her, they challenged her by saying, "If we find the little girl's body, her throat will be cut." In that instant, Alyssa's expression changed completely. They knew they had caught her. Meanwhile, forensic experts were analyzing the partially erased entries in Alyssa's diary. They recovered a chilling passage that read, "I just killed someone. I strangled and cut their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how I feel right now. It's amazing. Right after I did it, I felt like, I can't do this," which was actually pretty enjoyable. "Now I'm kind of nervous and shaky. I have to go to church now." Investigators noted that Alyssa spoke of her victims in the plural, which raised questions. While no other disappearances had been reported, the fact remained that Alyssa had dug not one, but two holes in the forest. This, combined with her sister Emma's name written ominously on her wall and the YouTube video where she hurt her younger siblings, led detectives to suspect that Alyssa might have originally planned to harm her siblings, but ultimately targeted a less obvious victim. An alternate theory suggested that Alyssa might have intended to kill again if her crime went undetected. With mounting evidence against her, Alyssa confessed to the crime, though she refused to explain why she had used plural references or dug two graves. On October 23rd, Alyssa led the officers to the exact location of Elizabeth's grave, not the empty hole volunteers had found, but the one that held all the answers. Deep in the woods, officers discovered Elizabeth's lifeless body. Alyssa had concealed her so well that none of the searchers had noticed the grave. She was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder, meaning the crime was premeditated. She was taken to the Cole County Jail where she awaited trial. A forensic examination confirmed that Elizabeth had been strangled, her throat and wrists cut, and stabbed. With these findings, authorities reconstructed the harrowing events. On Friday, October 16, 2009, Alyssa, who had no school that day, used her free time to put a sinister plan into action, digging a grave in the woods. 5 days later, when Emma invited Elizabeth over, Alyssa decided it was time to execute her plan. After playing in the yard, Alyssa called Emma and Elizabeth into the woods, under the pretense of showing them something. Once there, Alyssa convinced her sister to leave her alone with Elizabeth. She and Elizabeth walked deeper into the woods until they reached the two holes Alyssa had dug days earlier. As Elizabeth walked ahead, unaware of the danger, Alyssa struck her brutally on the head. Though stunned, Elizabeth remained conscious. Alyssa then pinned her down, strangling her until she passed out. To make sure her victim would not survive, she pulled a knife from her back pocket and stabbed Elizabeth 8 times in the chest, later cutting her wrists and throat. She then dragged Elizabeth's body into one of the graves, covering it with rocks and branches. 45 minutes later, Alyssa returned home, acting as if nothing had happened. As the case gained media attention, the police withheld details, including Alyssa's name and age, to keep the case untainted for trial. Additionally, there was serious consideration of trying Alyssa as an adult due to the crime's severity. Missouri, one of the 22 states with a dual jurisdiction system for minors, allows suspects to be detained until age 21, after which a court reassesses whether they have been rehabilitated or must complete their sentence. Prosecutors were determined that Alyssa, seen as a threat to society, should face full accountability. Elizabeth's family held a princess-themed funeral on October 28, 2009. The casket arrived at the cemetery in a horse-drawn carriage, greeted by friends and family dressed in pink, Elizabeth's favorite color. Those who knew her described her as a sweet, kind child who loved cats and was a bit shy yet friendly. On November 17, 2009, a judge ruled that Alyssa would be tried as an adult, and her photo was released by news outlets. Her defense attorney expressed that this decision placed Alyssa in grave danger, as she now faced the maximum penalty, which he considered excessive given her age. Additionally, he worried that Alyssa might not survive her time in the Cole County Jail. At her next court appearance on December 8, 2009, reporters gathered outside, eager for a photograph of the young defendant. But to everyone's surprise, despite her confession and the evidence against her, Alyssa pleaded not guilty. While awaiting her next hearing, Alyssa attempted self-harm by scratching herself with her nails and showed severe anxiety and depression. Concerned for her well-being, prison doctors placed her under close watch to prevent any further attempts at self-harm. Witnessing her mental state, her attorney filed a motion for a psychiatric evaluation and requested that she be transferred to a mental health facility. The judge agreed, and Alyssa was moved from jail to the Children's Psychiatric Hospital, then later to Fulton State Hospital for further assessment. Due to the accused's mental health issues, the trial was postponed until May 16, 2011. However, Alyssa's attorney filed a motion to move the date forward, arguing that she was facing severe public judgment. According to her lawyer, Alyssa had already been condemned by the public, and speeding up the process was essential for her mental health. The trial was set for January 30, 2012, but before that date, Alyssa expressed a desire to confess. On January 10th of that year, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. This choice was partly strategic, as a second-degree murder conviction could mean life with the possibility of parole, or a sentence ranging from 10 to 30 years. She hoped to avoid a death sentence. Some speculated that this was part of a legal strategy, but her new lawyer insisted she simply wanted to take responsibility for her actions. That same day, the Cole County Circuit Judge asked Alyssa to recount, in her own words, what happened on October 21, 2009. Without emotion, Alyssa admitted to strangling and stabbing Elizabeth. When prosecutors asked if she had also used a knife to cut Elizabeth's throat, Alyssa confirmed she had. Her grandmother, overcome with grief, left the courtroom, heartbroken by her granddaughter's confession. Alyssa's lawyers then brought up her mental state at the time of the crime, mentioning that she had attempted suicide 2 years prior and had been prescribed a higher dose of antidepressants just 2 weeks before the murder. They highlighted her traumatic family history, noting her mother's abandonment and her father's incarceration. Psychologists who examined her testified that she was severely emotionally disturbed, suffering from major depression and symptoms of borderline personality disorder. Alyssa's legal team hoped these details might reduce her sentence or lead to psychiatric treatment rather than prison. But their efforts were unsuccessful. The prosecutor demanded a life sentence plus an additional 71 years for the life Elizabeth lost, citing Alyssa's premeditation and the 2 graves she had dug as proof. Ultimately, Alyssa was convicted of second-degree murder and armed criminal action. On February 8, 2012, Alyssa returned to court and, for the first time, addressed Elizabeth's family directly. "I know words will never be enough. They can't describe how terrible I feel about all this. If I could trade my life to bring hers back, I would. I'm so sorry." However, her words did little to sway Elizabeth's family. Patricia, Elizabeth's mother, called Alyssa a diabolical monster, while Elizabeth's grandmother shouted from her wheelchair, "Alyssa should be released from jail the same day Elizabeth comes out of her grave." That day, Alyssa was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder with the possibility of parole after 35 years and 5 months, meaning she could apply for release when she turns 50. In 2014, Alyssa attempted to appeal her sentence, pointing out that the U.S. Supreme Court had recently ruled against mandatory life sentences without parole for minors. She claimed she would not have pleaded guilty had she known this. However, in a later hearing, she admitted she was aware of her other options when she took the plea. The Missouri State Court of Appeals denied her request in March 2014, but her legal battles weren't over. In October 2015, Patricia filed a lawsuit against Alyssa for the wrongful death of her daughter, seeking more than $5 million in damages. The trial was set for August 7, 2017, but in March of that year, Alyssa signed a settlement agreement. On June 25, Patricia accepted the settlement and dismissed the charges, adding a condition that Alyssa must notify her whenever she receives money for publicizing details about Elizabeth's case. In the years following her conviction, Alyssa gained an unsettling cult following. She received letters almost daily from fans who saw her as a rebellious icon, some even claiming that violence was a solution to their own struggles. On social media, many of these troubled young fans called for her release, declaring their admiration and support, seemingly ignoring the pain endured by Elizabeth's family. Currently, Alyssa remains in prison. She still hopes to secure parole before turning 50, arguing that she should not have been tried as an adult and that her personal history should have been considered more heavily. Despite this, she shows little remorse for her actions, and prison staff consider her a high-risk inmate who refuses psychiatric treatment, insisting she is a normal person. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. A woman's body was found by police before midnight on the 25th of October 2023 in a school's gymnasium toilet. Police described the body as a woman in her early 20s and concluded her cause of death to be homicide. Police also reported serious head injuries found on the body, leading her to be unrecognizable when discovered. The next morning, the school sent an email to all students' parents, stating that the school would be closed for the rest of the week due to a critical incident, and to assure parents that no students were involved in the incident. So, what had happened? It was in May 2002 in Australia, specifically in New South Wales, that Jamie and his wife Peta welcomed their firstborn. The arrival of their daughter was a source of immense joy not only for her parents, but also for her maternal grandmother, who was immediately captivated by the little girl's beautiful blue eyes. Her warm smile radiated happiness, enchanting everyone around her. The kids had a privileged childhood setting along those idyllic coasts with their mild temperatures, where the locals knew each other well. Indeed, Jamie and Peta had earned the esteem of their community, and by extension, Lily also became very beloved. Later, the family welcomed their second and final child, whom they named Max. Jamie worked as the water polo coach at a girls' school in the economic and business heart of Sydney. It was there that Lily pursued her studies. Throughout her time at school, she proved to be an outgoing girl with lots of friends. Lily was an exceptional student who enjoyed helping her peers with less academic dedication. This virtue, coupled with her good nature, won her the affection of many. As her younger brother grew up, the young girl also dedicated herself with patience and care to helping him overcome difficulties. Always brimming with energy, she was keen to learn swimming, and later, following in her father's footsteps, took up water polo, becoming an accomplished player. By the time she reached high school, she was recognized by all as one of the school's top students. Between her academic commitments and her numerous extracurricular activities, her teachers always saw her versatility and high level of achievement. These values were evident when the young girl not only joined the school's theater group, but also enrolled in dance classes. In reality, her dream was to excel in both disciplines, and she soon achieved this goal. It quickly became apparent that her performances blended dramatic expressiveness with the physical grace of dance. Knowing she possessed this talent, Lily prepared to participate in a festival. At this event, contestants had the opportunity to showcase their skills to the public and compete in various categories ranging from theater and dance to other artistic representations. Moreover, constructive feedback from qualified judges could help them improve their standards and also promote musical sponsorship within the community. Lily decided to perform a monologue from Macbeth, William Shakespeare's famous play, infusing it with her unique style. Instead of relying solely on dialogue and facial expression, she sought to convey the emotional journey of the main character through movement. The result was a harmonious combination that captivated the jury and earned her second place in the theatrical category. In the sporting arena, the talented young woman also earned amazing rewards, becoming the swimming champion in the under-17 category. As expected, Jamie and Peta were bursting with pride. For them, every achievement of their daughter was a cause for celebration, like in 2018, when at just 16 years old, Lily passed her learner's driving test. Immediately, Peta and Jamie proudly shared the news on their social media. In 2020, during the high school graduation ceremony, Lily radiated light and happiness. Intelligent, beautiful, and possessing an independent spirit, the world opened up before her. By then, she had already decided to pursue a career in the sports world and enrolled at the University of Technology, Sydney, to study for a bachelor's degree in sports business management. In early 2021, with the start of classes, she took a part-time job as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. From the beginning, the work experience turned out to be much more fascinating than the young woman had anticipated. With her vibrant personality, she managed to transform the classes into a unique fun space, winning over her students' affection. Her age also played in her favor, making her closer to the group, and everyone felt as if they had known her forever. Part of Lily's charm as a teacher was taking the time for details. For example, she wrote cards for each student, focusing on their personalities, beauty, and individual talents. It was there that Lily met Paul, the coach and sports assistant at the school. Born in 1999 in the Netherlands, Paul was the only child of a couple with a privileged economic position. The family moved to Australia in 2015 when the father was transferred to Sydney for work reasons. Once there, Paul enrolled in St. Andrew's Cathedral School, where he joined the cricket team. Over time, after earning the respect and admiration of his peers, he was appointed captain. He also actively participated in the school community by being part of the leadership team, contributing to the planning and execution of various events. However, not all his peers had a good opinion of him. Some considered him quite arrogant, and they were bothered by the way he approached girls, as if all were willing to fall in love with him. As it later emerged in 2017, once Paul graduated from high school, the institution offered him the opportunity to become an assistant coach for the cricket and hockey teams. He accepted the offer and, at the beginning of 2018, fully took over the role. In his new role, he was attentive and enthusiastic about motivating the students. However, under circumstances that have not been clarified, Paul returned with his parents to the Netherlands. During that time, he enrolled in a master's program to complement his sports knowledge. At the end of it, he gladly accepted an invitation to rejoin the sports department at St. Andrew's School. At the start of 2020, returning to the Australian dream, Paul reconnected with a former school and hockey mate. The two young men decided to share expenses and moved into an apartment in Kensington, a suburb located in the eastern area. As part of his duties at St. Andrew AS, he was tasked with welcoming the sports teams of other coaches after their respective classes, which included being aware of their schedules. This responsibility facilitated his interaction with Lily. In addition to his primary job, Paul joined the field hockey team at the University of New South Wales and also taught at a second institution. Despite these activities, he was quite a solitary person. Then, on March 18, 2020, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Australian Prime Minister declared a health emergency and imposed a strict quarantine. The restrictions affected all sectors, leaving Paul not only without anything to do, but also isolated from all human contact. He spent a total of 18 months in solitude in a city that, although familiar, felt somewhat foreign to him. Like many people around the world, this isolation affected his way of relating to others to some extent. By mid-September 2021, as the restrictions were lifted and things began to return to normal, Paul resumed his activities. He rapidly became an essential part of the hockey team, to the point where his image was used in promoting the games. Amid this period of openness, he had already shown a particular interest in Lily, with intentions that clearly went beyond mere friendship. However, according to the students, she was not the only one to whom the young coach dedicated his charming efforts. In fact, some of his students viewed him as someone who inappropriately flirted with the school's teenage girls. However, these concerns were not widely known. In fact, many considered him an essential part of the team. His exceptional performance was crucial in leading them to the final of the Sydney Hockey League, even though they were defeated in that match on September 9, 2023. A few days later, Paul finally gathered the courage to ask Lily out, and she accepted happily, unaware of any rumors about him. Their first date turned out much better than either had imagined, leading them into a passionate and swift romance. However, the intensity of their feelings did not make them overlook the importance of discretion, especially considering their work environment. Thus, they opted to keep their relationship private. Initially, Lily kept her part of the agreement. But Paul, on the other hand, couldn't resist boasting to his students and began to hint that he was dating her. As expected, the rumor gradually spread throughout the educational center until, in the first days of October 2023, Lily learned of his indiscretions and felt betrayed. For her, it was not a minor issue, as the way he bragged about their relationship left her exposed to criticism, leading to disappointment. The romance was just 5 weeks old, and if she couldn't trust him, she was determined to end it. She couldn't continue with someone like Paul. Despite his insistence and attempts at excuses and justifications, Lily made it clear there was nothing more to consider. It was definitively the end of any interaction between them. In a matter of hours, Paul's hurt from the breakup turned into anger, not at himself for breaking a promise but at her for not forgiving him. Such anger led him to imagine various scenarios, all aimed at harming the young woman. He then decided to go to a hardware store and there chose what he considered the ideal weapon, a hammer. On October 25, 2023, Lily left her house and attended her university classes as usual. In the afternoon, she went to the school for another workday with her students. Meanwhile, Paul rented a silver car and arrived at the school in this vehicle. He didn't get out, he just stayed there, waiting patiently until the activities ended. Around 7 p.m., when the water polo students left, Paul finally made his way towards the institution's gym. In his hands, he carried the hammer. Once there, he saw Lily enter the bathroom and followed her. All his movements were recorded by the security cameras at the location. Inside the bathroom, with no witnesses, they argued. Everything happened very quickly, almost as swiftly as their brief love story had begun. Then, amidst the shouting, Paul managed to gain the upper hand and overpower Lily. The newly purchased tool was used to end her life. He then took the girl's backpack and cell phone, and about an hour later, he left the bathroom. This sequence was captured again by the surveillance cameras. Afterward, he drove to the area known as the Gap, known for its cliffs. As he walked around for the third time, Paul was recorded by security cameras. Meanwhile, Peta and Jamie tried repeatedly to contact their daughter to no avail. Desperate, they decided to alert the police. The authorities immediately took notice of the situation and began searching for Lily. Around 10 at night, Paul sent a text message from the young woman's phone, asking Jamie to pick her up at the school without giving further explanations. An hour later, the 24-year-old perpetrator made an anonymous call to emergency services, reporting a body in the St. Andrew's School gym and stating that the case needed investigation. After hanging up, he disposed of the hammer and Lily's backpack in a garbage bin. He then abandoned the rented vehicle and walked to the edge of one of the cliffs, jumping and ending his own life. When the police arrived at the school, following the anonymous call just before midnight, the institution was in complete and utter silence, the opposite of its usual bustling energy. In the gym, as soon as the officers saw the silhouette on the floor, they realized their worst fears had come true. Lily's body lay lifeless. However, due to the severe injuries she suffered, investigators were initially unable to identify her. In the course of the investigation, the officers' first task was to seize the gym's security camera footage. Next, the team traced the anonymous call. It became quite clear that whoever had made it was likely to provide more information. Some reports state that the first thing they determined was that the number belonged to Paul, and they began to call him insistently. They didn't suspect him at the moment but wanted him to share everything he knew. Unfortunately, the young man did not respond to the calls. Shortly after, the investigators were able to locate where the call had been made from. Thus, In the early hours of the morning on Thursday, October 26, 2023, the police arrived at the Gap area and cordoned off the surroundings. After patrolling and conducting thorough searches, they discovered the hammer, which was immediately considered the fatal weapon. Finally, the agents found Paul's belongings. Around 4 in the morning, the police officers requested the school authorities to suspend classes until the investigation was concluded. This measure was communicated to all parents and guardians through a text message mentioning a critical incident, naturally causing panic to set in every home in the community. 2 hours later, a second considerably more reassuring message arrived because, by then, the school's management had decided to assure that no student was involved in the incident. However, after a sleepless night, Lily's parents received the devastating news of their daughter's cruel fate. Within minutes, the family's home was filled with neighbors and friends, all ready to offer as much support as possible in a situation no one could have ever imagined. Thanks to the gym's camera footage, the police identified Paul as the young man who had followed Lily. From there, authorities were able to outline the nature of the relationship between the main suspect and the victim, thus identifying a motive behind the crime. However, due to the lack of clues about his whereabouts, investigators began to consider the possibility that he might have taken his own life. Regardless, boats and even a helicopter were deployed along the coastline to find him. Through a statement, the police made the main suspect's name public, indicating that the nature of the injuries made it evident that Lily had been a victim of homicide. Although it was confirmed there were no previous domestic violence incidents between her and Paul. In the early hours of the next morning, Friday, October 27, 2023, a group of workers was preparing to start their day at a construction site near the top of one of the cliffs. However, they had to interrupt their work almost before it had begun when they were startled by the macabre sight of a body floating near the rocks. They immediately informed the police, who then established a new crime scene there and also organized a rescue team to recover the body. The unfavorable weather conditions made the already complicated operation even more difficult. Finally, by noon, the Marine unit achieved its goal with the assistance of a helicopter. The media was informed that the body was of an unidentified male victim, although officers had strong suspicions about his identity. Meanwhile, the remains were transported to the Forensic Medicine Service for a mandatory autopsy. The fingerprints collected were sent to the Embassy of the Netherlands for comparison with their records, leading to the identification of the man as Paul. That same afternoon, in their first public statement, Lily's family expressed the profound grief they were experiencing. Despite everything, they said, they were overwhelmed with immense gratitude for the community's support. Concurrently, given that the police investigation was ongoing, they opted to refrain from further comments. The director of the school also shared warm words of thanks to everyone for the love and support provided during these difficult times. She mentioned that Lily had always displayed qualities that made her unforgettable. Beyond the pain of loss, it was hard to overlook the fact that the tragedy occurred in a space where minors should feel protected. Aware of this, the school sent a letter to parents assuring them that, in the words of the police, the crime was unforeseeable. In response to the events, access to the gym was restricted for students, while the library was transformed into a walk-in psychological counseling center for students needing specialist help to cope with the impact. Amid the case's impact, a renowned local media outlet contacted a criminal psychologist and expert in criminal cases for an interview to help the public understand the dimensions of the occurred events. When asked about his impression of the facts, he stated that the victim's actions were typical of men with fragile egos, incapable of accepting rejection. However, he viewed the young man's relationship not merely as one of anger or hurt, but as malicious. He highlighted that there was no spontaneity, but a clear intention to harm, something that, in his opinion, was evident from the cruelty with which Paul sent messages pretending to be Lily, asking to be picked up when the young woman was already deceased. Overall, for the expert, Paul's was a narcissistic profile with psychopathic tendencies. Paul's parents decided not to repatriate their son's remains to their home country. Instead, they opted to cremate him and scatter his ashes on a Sydney beach. Lily's funeral took place on November 17, 2023. The more than 500 attendees were asked to wear bright colors and bring flowers, as Lily would have liked. Perhaps the most emotional moment of the day was when Jamie spoke heartfelt words for his beloved daughter and to all those who had gathered in her name. Although it took Lily's grandmother some time to express her feelings, she eventually encapsulated her thoughts about her granddaughter magnificently. She said Lily's brief life was enough to make a difference in many lives. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your company. If you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is Unreal True Crime until our next episode. Good night. January 16, 2023, began like any other day in the province of Lima, Peru. It was a quiet, residential area where nothing ever happened. The neighbors knew each other, greeted each other cordially, and nobody had issues with anyone. However, around 2 in the afternoon, everything changed forever. The peace that prevailed was shattered by loud cries for help coming from one of the apartments. It was a female voice pleading for her life. The first thought among the complex inhabitants was that there must be a thief, an intruder who had broken into the home of this beautiful family. They called the police, who arrived at the location within minutes. They knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The screams had ceased. It was too late. Entering the apartment, the first thing they saw was a child alone and frightened. They asked him where his parents were, but he couldn't answer. They continued to move through the place until they reached the master bedroom, where they found a woman, later identified as Marilyn Martinez, lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her life had been taken, but the only person missing was her husband. Marilyn Martinez was born on September 3, 1995. Her family was middle class. Although money was not a problem, they always strived to improve their economic status to have a better life. Instilled with strong values, Marilyn's main dream was always to study, secure a good job, and achieve everything she desired. However, someone obstructed her path. At just 17 years old, she met Alexander Israel Pinedo, a 30-year-old man almost twice her age. Yet she didn't care. The love was immediate. Unlike others around her, Alexander seemed unattracted to her responsible and ambitious side. Instead, it bothered him, and problems soon followed. Alexander frequently displayed intense jealousy whenever Marilyn went out with friends or even her family. He would lose his sanity, and although Marilyn tried to talk about issues, Alexander would violently beat her in a sinister attempt to show who was in charge. Despite the issues, they moved in together when she was still very young, to counteract the torment she experienced at home. Marilyn sought things that made her happy. If she couldn't have stability in her relationship, she would at least find it in her career. She was studying and simultaneously began working in an office. She excelled at what she did, was very diligent, and committed herself fully to everything she undertook. Upon turning 18, Marilyn decided she had endured enough, packed her beautiful suitcases, and left. However, Within a few hours, she realized she had forgotten some items in their shared home. She returned to collect them and found Alexander completely furious. He struck her on the head and punched her in the groin. Marilyn left the house crying and went to see her mother and sister, who both encouraged her to file a police report. She followed their advice, yet her determination quickly faded. Like a true manipulator, Alexander showed up at her house and convinced her to get back together, promising a fresh start. He vowed to treat her well and give her something she had always wanted, a child. Marilyn withdrew the police complaint and moved back in with Alexander. They had a beautiful wedding where he promised to care for and love her forever. 9 months later, their first and only child was born, and they moved to an apartment in the province of Lima. However, Alexander's promises quickly evaporated. On one occasion, he inflicted severe blows to Marilyn's head in front of their little one, who was just 1 year and 2 months old. The sinister man had no shame in exercising violence in front of his own son. Burdened by the horrible situation with her partner and the extensive care her young son required, Marilyn neglected her physical appearance, devoting all her time to caring for the baby. Her husband had forbidden her from visiting her mother and sister, as well as from having them come over to help. Growing increasingly depressed, Marilyn gained a significant amount of weight, which only added to her frustration. She no longer met her own beauty standards and didn't feel like the perfect girl she wanted to be. Nonetheless, Marilyn was never the type to remain passive when things didn't unfold as she wished. Something had to be done. She decided to initiate a plan to regain her figure, believing that looking good would make her feel good. Her training started to pay off, and Marilyn had an idea. Many women must be going through the same thing as her. If she recorded her routines and talked about her plans for spiritual growth, she could help others in similar situations. TikTok was the perfect platform for her mission, known for its vast array of videos where many users showcased their transformations and encouraged others to do the same. These were short, easy-to-follow recordings. By the time Marilyn turned 29, she had become a well-known influencer. She had nearly 600,000 followers on TikTok, along with 24,000 on Instagram. Everyone loved her, from housewives wanting to emulate her lifestyle to men attracted to her physique. Her content mainly consisted of exercise routines showing her body's progress, as well as health and self-care tips. She also did daily vlogs, explaining how to be an entrepreneurial woman. But Marilyn didn't just post videos of herself. She also enjoyed sharing snippets of her personal life. On multiple occasions, she was seen spending time with her husband and son, who was now 8 years old. The videos often featured Marilyn dancing outside her apartment or playing with little pieces of paper, and also depicted humorous couple scenes that greatly differed from their actual dynamic. All her followers supported the relationship, as they appeared very happy and united, having been together for 12 years. They were seen as a role model. Her followers highlighted how Alexander supported her projects, but no one knew what happened behind closed doors. Marilyn's videos of dancing and lip-syncing to songs stirred up intense hatred in Alexander. He felt she made them to attract men who would fall at her feet in the comments section. Whenever Alexander saw something on Marilyn's social media that he disliked, the violence would reappear and increase day by day. Marilyn's family was deeply concerned for her. On the rare occasions when they saw her, they couldn't help but notice how her husband controlled every move she made, criticized her clothing, and constantly watched her with disapproval. Whenever Marilyn was away for a couple of hours, she would return home to a disastrous jealousy scene. Alexander bombarded her with questions about whom she had been with and why she had been gone for so long. Marilyn reacted to these comments, but in return, she faced physical violence from her husband. She began to think about separation but feared how it might affect their son. On the other hand, unconcerned about their son's mental health, Alexander started to use him as a spy, asking him to check his mother's phone and report on her social media interactions. The situation escalated to the point where Alexander wanted to know even what she discussed with her family members, fearing they were advising her to leave him. Despite the disastrous family life, they maintained appearances outside the home, presenting themselves as just another family to the neighbors and continuing to record videos for TikTok. No one outside their close circle suspected anything. Until one day, Marilyn made a post that changed everything. On January 15, 2023, Marilyn uploaded a video to her weekly message section, a new feature on her account. In it, she was seen dressed in a suit, then working out, and finally happy in a swimming pool. In the background, the song Flowers by Miley Cyrus could be heard, a track that expresses women's autonomy. The video included captions over the images with phrases like, "I can buy myself flowers," "Write my name in the sand," "Talk to myself for hours," "See the things you don't understand," and it concluded with, "I can love myself better than you ever did." Users took this as a sign that her marriage might have ended. In reality, it was a cry for help. Alexander saw the video on his phone and noticed hundreds of comments encouraging his wife to move forward. He also saw several men who, as always, were enchanted by her beauty and decided he had endured enough. The following day, around 2 in the afternoon, Marilyn was in her room doing her exercise routine, distracted. Alexander grabbed a knife from the kitchen and went to the bedroom they shared. He silently entered and stabbed her in the back, knocking her to the floor. Then, he stabbed her 29 more times, ignoring Marilyn's pleas, and finally took her life. After committing the horrendous act, he turned around and realized their son had witnessed everything, entering a total state of shock. He only snapped out of it when he heard the police sirens arriving at their home. The neighbors had heard Marilyn's loud cries for help coming from the house. They were not accustomed to such incidents in their quiet neighborhood and were truly dismayed. They called the police, who arrived quickly at the scene and tried to knock on the door, but no one answered, so they broke into the home looking for signs of life. The first thing they saw was the boy in the hallway in a state of distress. He told them he had locked himself in one of the rooms because he was afraid his father might hurt him. He didn't fully understand what had happened. The officers took the boy to the patrol car to ensure his safety and then continued searching for his parents. Upon reaching the master bedroom, they encountered a horrific scene. Marilyn's lifeless body was on the floor next to her bed, lying in a pool of blood, with multiple wounds to her head, arm, and wrist. The officers didn't even call for a doctor, as there was no hope. They continued to search the house, hoping to find the perpetrator, fearing he might have fled. However, Alexander was in the living room, sitting very calmly, showing no remorse. He confessed to the crime and allowed the officers to handcuff him. As a precaution, in case he later regretted his statement, one of the officers took out his cell phone and started recording. Alexander wasn't bothered. He was used to performing for the screens. When asked if he had used the same knife for all the injuries he had inflicted, he answered affirmatively. Before being taken to the patrol car to be transported to the station, he asked the authorities to take care of his son. Alexander was placed in pre-trial detention, awaiting the start of the judicial process. He returned to the house where he committed the crime to participate in the reconstruction of the events. This time, he himself prevented being recorded, seeming guilty of having murdered his wife. He even wore the same shirt that had appeared in several of their videos. He detailed Marilyn's last moments of life, admitting he had taken her by surprise so she couldn't defend herself. He mentioned seeing the blood flow. At that moment, he thought about taking his own life, deciding it was his turn. But before he could stab himself, he backed out, describing himself as a coward in his own words. Despite the magnitude of his narrative, the sinister man spoke with total coldness, as if recounting an anecdote. He also did not hesitate to say that his son had witnessed the crime. He reiterated that he was a murderer who had killed his wife and promised to pay whatever was necessary, although he did not seem very remorseful. That same day, local news broadcast the video, which even reached TikTok, the platform where Marilyn had often appeared cheerful and happy. At first, her followers thought it was a distasteful joke, but as hours passed, all Peruvian media outlets spread the news, and the collective grief was overwhelming. Social media unified in demanding the maximum penalty for the murderer. The trial began swiftly, with Marilyn's relatives present to give their version of the story. They emphasized that episodes of domestic violence were constant in the relationship. They detailed how Marilyn had been mistreated physically and psychologically by her husband over the 12 long years of their relationship. They even mentioned the complaint she had filed against him in 2012, which she later regretted and withdrew. When Marilyn's sister took the stand, she made a powerful statement, noting that she had had the chance to observe the house after the police had finished their investigation. She pointed out that a part of Marilyn's wardrobe was completely empty, most likely because, considering also the video posted on her TikTok account the day before the murder, she was planning to finally leave her husband. Alexander denied that their relationship had ended but admitted they had many problems. He spoke about how his partner's thousands of followers tried to woo her through messages, which made him extremely jealous. He admitted that jealousy was the motive for killing Marilyn, as if it were a valid reason. Public prosecutor's office ordered 9 months of preventive detention for Alexander, identifying him as the perpetrator of the murder. It is hoped that a more extensive trial can be held in the future, where the maximum penalty is sought. Until then, an entire country will be watching. Social media was filled with messages of solidarity for the terrible event. Hundreds of TikTok users shared videos recounting the story and using the hashtag Justice for Marilyn. For those who followed her on social media, it was a profound shock, but even those who did not know her empathized with her case. The case became so significant that several accounts decided to post videos raising awareness on the issue. These videos encouraged women to report if they suffer from gender violence, warning them never to ignore the slightest sign of abuse, and emphasizing that one can never fully know their partners, boyfriends, or lovers. These crimes often occur within the family by men who claim to love their partners. The goal was to encourage those suffering in their relationships to leave before it's too late. Although her videos were once filled with laughter, they became a sort of sanctuary for her followers. Marilyn's son is under the custody of his maternal grandmother, away from the media spotlight. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your company. If you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is Unreal True Crime. Until the next episode, good night. The afternoon of January 15th, 2016, began like any other day. Maria de Jesus Zamudio called her mother, Yesenia Zamudio, to share her plans for the evening. She sounded very excited. She was going to a scenic restaurant followed by karaoke with some friends. Her mother wasn't worried. Her daughter was always very cautious. At 4 in the morning, Yesenia was sleeping peacefully until her phone began to ring. When she answered, she couldn't recognize the caller's voice. The only thing she understood was that Marishui, as she affectionately called her daughter, had suffered a fall and was admitted to the hospital. Confused, Yesenia contacted her ex-husband, and they both rushed to the indicated clinic, but they couldn't find their daughter there. They searched everywhere until they finally found her at another hospital. The situation was worse than it seemed. Her daughter had a traumatic brain injury and fractures in her femur and legs. But that wasn't the most terrible part. Marishui was in a coma. According to the doctors, the young woman had tried to take her own life by jumping from the 5th floor of an apartment. Neither Yesenia nor her ex-husband believed this. They knew there was something much more sinister behind that story, and they wouldn't rest until they found out the truth. Maria de Jesus Zamudio was born on April 5, 1996, in Mexico City. As the third among 4 sisters, she quickly won over the hearts of all who knew her, affectionately earning the nickname Marichui. Throughout her elementary education, she attended a Catholic school. Her dream was to become a nun to help as many people as possible, aiming above all to distinguish herself from selfish individuals. To achieve her goal, she spent every afternoon with her best friend, organizing plays, dances, and talks for younger children to draw them closer to religion. Her interest didn't stop there. She was an extremely active girl, keen on sports, practicing karate and swimming. However, over time, she discovered her true passion was basketball. As a teenager, Marishui moved away from religion, but not from her studies. She became a very cultured and diligent young woman, spending her time reading and visiting museums every Sunday. She also had a passion for taking photographs of her cat. Although she enjoyed going out like any other teenager, she did not do it often, preferring to spend time with her family. Her passion for study paid off, and she was admitted to the petroleum engineering program at the National Polytechnic Institute. Out of 822 applicants, she was one of the 176 women who got in. Initially, Marishui thought she couldn't attend because it was a costly institution, but her record of excellent grades earned her a full scholarship. Despite having her studies secured, the young woman wanted to be economically independent and got a formal job at a cinema chain in Mexico City. There, she won the affection of both her colleagues and customers. Even on promotion days, when the cinema was packed, she managed to make those who approached the purchase window smile. Her goal was to save enough money to take her nephews to Disneyland. Meanwhile, she enjoyed celebrating the Day of the Dead with them, her favorite holiday. Every November, she made bags of sweets and went out to distribute them with the little ones. Marishui's kindness was not only reflected in her relationship with her nephews. She remembered all her close ones' birthdays, visited them whenever they were sad, and helped them with any inconvenience. She was surrounded by people who loved her. She had the best possible relationship with her mother. They texted each other every morning and dreamed of moving together to a house in Playa del Carmen. Marishui had her whole life planned out. After finishing her degree, she would pursue a master's, then work as an engineer, and later form a family as united as her own. In 2016, she achieved one of her goals. She moved into an apartment with another girl from the university. She had adjusted well to student life, joined the basketball team, and made many friends, but things were not as good as they seemed. Marishui began to suffer harassment from a faculty member named Julio Ivan Ruiz, who was in charge of the Introduction to Petroleum Drilling course. He went as far as suggesting through Facebook Messenger that she could pass the course in exchange for sexual favors. The young woman did not accept this. She spent the entire Christmas vacation studying and took the extraordinary period exam. Julio just gave her a hostile look and failed her. The torment didn't end there. She was also harassed by a student named Mario, who sent her messages every day, claiming he was in love with her. Despite Marishui's lack of response, he continued writing, and the messages became increasingly aggressive. Uncomfortable with both situations, Marichuy formally requested a change of major, but she never went through with it. On the afternoon of January 15, 2016, Marichuy spoke with her mother on the phone, as she did every day, telling her that she would go to a scenic restaurant with some friends, then they would visit a karaoke bar, and she would return home to sleep. At 4 in the morning, Yesenia's phone began to ring. When she answered, she heard an unknown voice, informing her that Marichuy had fallen and was admitted to a hospital. Yesenia immediately hung up the phone without asking for explanations. The most important thing at that moment was to see her daughter. She went to the clinic with her ex-husband. Upon arrival, the receptionist informed her that her daughter was not there. They searched every hospital in the region until they finally arrived at the Valbuena Hospital. Her name was on the list of the last admitted, but with several spelling mistakes. However, that was not the worst part. What truly shocked Yesenia and her ex-husband was finding out that Marichuy had not suffered a simple fall. The doctors told them she had fallen from the window of an apartment, which was on the 5th floor, sustaining a traumatic brain injury, and was in a coma. The situation was strange, but Yesenia preferred to focus first on her daughter's health. Although the young woman had a chance to survive, she needed to undergo several surgeries for the fractures in her femur, legs, and skull, which were extremely costly. Through social media, Yesenia asked all of Marichuy's friends to pray for her and organized a fundraiser to cover the high medical expenses. Thanks to Marichuy always helping her acquaintances, they did the same for her, allowing her to be transferred to a specialized hospital where she underwent multiple surgeries. But what happened that night? On January 15, 2016, Marichuy attended a dinner at a restaurant at 8 in the evening, planning to eat with 3 friends, one of them named Gabriel. However, Gabriel unexpectedly invited the teacher, Julio Ivan, which made the young woman uncomfortable since he was the professor who had harassed her previously. Marichuy tried to stay calm, and after dinner, they went to karaoke. When they left, she tried to take a taxi to return to her apartment, but the teacher insisted on driving her in his truck, which Gabriel was driving. Marichuy, somewhat frightened, accepted and sat in the back with the 2 men. During the ride, Julio and Gabriel began to touch Marichuy, and when she tried to escape by getting out of the truck, they knocked her down and forcefully put her back in. Upon arriving at her apartment, some neighbors saw Gabriel and Julio carrying Marichuy up the stairs while she hit and struggled to escape from them. She even knocked on some apartment doors asking for help, but no one helped her, not even her friends with whom she shared the rent, thinking it might be a robbery. Minutes later, they opened the apartment, and once inside, Gabriel and Julio tried to undress her to abuse her, managing to tear her clothes and break the buttons. The other 2 roommates just watched from afar and decided not to intervene. Marichuy continued screaming and asking for help. Seeing that the situation was going nowhere, Julio and Gabriel proceeded to throw her out of the window. A neighbor named Rosa saw Marichuy's body fall more than 12 meters, while her attackers fled the scene, at which point she called the police. Marichuy fought for her life in the hospital for several days, but ultimately, she died. This version was confirmed after a forensic doctor mentioned that the injury mechanics provided key elements, indicating that the young woman did not jump headfirst into the void but fell feet first because she tried to grab her attackers until the last moment. This was also proven by finding Julio and Gabriel's DNA under Marichuy's nails, leading to a 180-degree turn in the case. In 2018, authorities discarded the accident hypothesis and the idea that she took her own life, classifying the incident as manslaughter, with Gabriel and Julio as the main suspects. However, the latter continued teaching at the university as if nothing had happened. Yesenia was dissatisfied, stating that the case should be classified as femicide, and that by not doing so, they were diminishing the importance of the abuse her daughter had suffered before dying. She filed a complaint with the Mexico City Human Rights Commission. Due to the investigation file being poorly compiled, Yesenia also filed numerous complaints with the Mexico City Secretary of Public Security, the Superior Court of Justice of the capital, and the then city prosecutor's office. The Mexico City Human Rights Commission initiated an investigation and determined that evidence had been omitted during the case. There was evidence of police incompetence and a clear lack of interest on the part of the state. In a report, it was established that in the early hours of January 16th, a police officer arrived at the scene and entered the apartment to see where the victim had jumped from, but only glanced around. After the ambulance left, the officer departed without securing the apartment or the area where the victim fell, and without notifying the judicial authority, which could have led to the manipulation of evidence afterward. Additionally, the autopsy performed on Marashui lacked basic requirements, such as listing all the individuals who had contact with the body and examining the intimate area to determine if she had suffered abuse before her death. Yesenia requested a public act in which the government would acknowledge their responsibility for these omissions and announce measures established to prevent their recurrence. This request was completely ignored, and the case was shelved again. Both Julio and Gabriel fled, and justice seemed far off. Tired of waiting for answers from the government, Yesenia joined the movement called Ni Una Menos and organized dozens of demonstrations, not only for her daughter, but also for all women who had been murdered because of their gender. In February 2020, Yesenia attended an event to demand justice for the femicide of a young woman who was killed by her partner after an argument. The demonstration took place outside the building where the crime occurred, where Yesenia gave a speech accusing the Mexican government of not having personnel trained in gender violence. Yesenia's speech went viral, and Marashui's case was finally brought back into focus. On September 7, 2020, it was finally classified as femicide, and Mexico City authorities made a public apology to Yesenia and the victim's relatives. On January 25, 2022, a new event for Marashui's case took place at the National Polytechnic Institute, where the university joined the apology previously made by the authorities. Although the general director was present, it was the institution's lawyer who extended the apology. Yesenia accepted the apologies but mentioned that more work was needed to find the murderers, who were still at large. She also remembered how Marashui's dreams were taken away 5 years ago, saying that if her daughter were alive, she would surely be in love, working, and very happy, as she had been throughout her short life. Months later, the National Polytechnic Institute, where Marashui studied, posthumously awarded the petroleum engineering degree to Yesenia. In February 2022, the police confirmed that, following intelligence operations, agents located and apprehended Gabriel, the probable perpetrator of Marashui's femicide. Thank you, dear audience, for tuning into Unreal True Crime. If our stories capture your interest, don't forget to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. Your support fuels our passion for uncovering the truth. Join us next time for more deep dives into the intriguing world of true crime. Dear audience, we've taken your feedback to heart, and I'm here because of it. My name is Michael, and I'm your new storyteller. I'm eager to bring you compelling narratives that I hope you'll find as intriguing as I do. Please share your thoughts and comments with us. We're committed to becoming the go-to channel for crime stories. Now let's get started with our next episode. It was 7:53 a.m. on April 22, 2016, when the Pike County Police in southern Ohio, United States, received a shocking call. On the other side of the line, the voice of a woman broken by emotion said there was blood everywhere. She was breathing heavily and couldn't provide more information. Eventually, she managed to explain what had happened, saying she had found her brother-in-law and one of his cousins, both seriously injured. The officers headed there. As they were en route to the residence, a neighbor asked them to stop. He wanted to give them 2 more addresses, those of relatives of the victims, feeling in his heart that they too had been attacked. Meanwhile, the woman found 2 more family members in another house, and the bodies began to pile up. By the time they visited the 3 trailer homes, the death toll was 7, all having been shot in the head while sleeping. As if that wasn't enough, by midday, they received news that another family member had been found dead. The only survivors were a 3-year-old boy, a 6-month-old baby, and another just 4 days old. Little Sophie was also alive, who, by chance, was with her father that night, as if she had known she needed to be protected. The Rodens were a large family from Ohio, United States. The patriarch, Christopher Roden, had been married to Dana Roden, with whom he had 3 children, Frankie, Hannah Mae, and Christopher Jr. By 2016, Christopher and Dana had separated but lived on the same property located on Union Hill Road in the rural area of Pike in Ohio, which they owned. Christopher, a 40-year-old laborer, worked at the family's Big Bear Lake complex and lived in a trailer with his 38-year-old cousin, Gary. Dana, then 37, worked as a nursing assistant at a rehabilitation center and resided in a trailer 2 kilometers from her ex-husband with their younger children, who were then 19 and 16 years old. Hannah's 2-year-old daughter, Sophie, also spent most of her time with them. Later, Frankie, who was 20, moved with his fiancée to another nearby trailer. He had a 3-year-old son named Bentley from a previous relationship and a 6-month-old baby with his new partner, spending most of his time helping his father at the complex. The family was rounded out by Kenneth, Christopher's brother. Like the rest of his relatives, he was known for being hard-working, commuting daily to Columbus for work, and living only 15 minutes away from the rest of his family. On April 18, 2016, the Roden family expanded with the arrival of Hannah's new daughter, whose father was unknown. Although it was speculated that the father could be Charlie, the brother of her sister-in-law, there was no certainty. Hannah had no interest in finding out, as she did not have a good relationship with Jake Wagner, Sophie's father. She preferred that the care of the new baby remained within the family, as she worked as a nursing assistant and finished high school. The relationship within the Roden family was such that they even included Bobby Jo Manley, Dana's sister, in their lives. As she was unemployed, Christopher offered her work taking care of his animals, given the large size of his property. Bobby accepted, unaware that during one of those visits she would encounter the most unimaginable scene possible. It was 7:53 a.m. on April 22, 2016, when Bobby entered the trailer, as she did every day, quickly realizing the house was not empty. Inside, she found Christopher and Gary amidst a massive pool of blood. She immediately took out her cell phone and dialed emergency services, her voice breaking as she requested they come to 477 Union Hill Road. Then, as if on reflex, Bobby went to the homes of her other relatives, knocked on the door, but no one answered. Seconds later, little Bentley came out. Upon entering, Bobby was breathless at the sight. On the bed lay the lifeless bodies of Frank and his wife, assaulted. Alive but splattered with blood was the 6-month-old baby. As the police were en route to the scene, another neighbor intercepted them, urging them to visit 2 other nearby locations, suspecting there would be more casualties. They were right. In the 3rd house, they found the bodies of Dana, Christopher Jr., and Hannah, also covered in blood. The only survivor from that home was the infant, just a few days old. By then, the news had spread like wildfire in the media. A cousin of the Rodens went to ensure Kenneth was safe. Sadly, he too had been shot. He called the police to report he had found the last body. By 1:26 p.m., all the victims had been accounted for: Christopher, Dana, Frankie, Hannah Roden, Christopher Jr., Hannah Hazel, the fiancé of Frankie, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were the young children whom the murderers had spared, and little Sophie, who, by chance, was at her father Jake's house. Examining the bodies, investigators were able to reconstruct the crime. Christopher had a defensive wound on his right arm, leading to the conclusion that he was awake when the assailants entered his home. He confronted the attackers but was overwhelmed by 9 gunshots. Gary was hit by 5 shots. Dana received the same number in her head and neck, some executed even after she had perished, indicating the attackers had been particularly brutal with her. Christopher Jr. was shot 4 times in the head while sleeping, as was Frankie. Hannah Hazel was also murdered with 2 shots to the skull. Kenneth was the only one with a single shot. All the victims had died from multiple gunshots fired from close range, precisely in the same body part. Detectives estimated the assailants fired a total of 32 times, clearly using a silencer, as no one in the area heard the noises. Moreover, all had their hands covered with plastic bags, and autopsy reports showed at least one of the victims had 9 significant wounds. It was clear this was a premeditated crime aimed at eradicating the entire clan, leaving unanswered who could have committed such a heinous act. Upon inspecting the scene, agents found 5 different types of bullet casings from Remington. However, they also found another unused bullet from a different model, confirming their suspicion that more than one attacker was involved in the crime. While the victim's blood was present in all the trailers, none of it matched the DNA of the perpetrators. Detectives attempted to review security camera footage from the homes, but the cameras had been disconnected. These devices also lacked DNA, clearly indicating that the planners of the crime had meticulously covered their tracks. Just as they were running out of hope, the officers found something. In 3 of the 4 homes, there were marijuana grow operations, and one of them contained more than 200 plants. They quickly theorized that the Rodens were involved in drug trafficking, a common occurrence in Ohio, and speculated that the motive for the crime might have been a drug-related dispute. They investigated whether the family had connections to cartels or drug traffickers but found nothing. The possibility of a family dispute over drug money was also considered but led nowhere. Additionally, they found cockfighting rings in one of the trailers. However, illegal cockfighting did not seem to be the motive behind the incident. They were about to leave without discovering anything when a key testimony emerged. Dana's father told detectives that the killers had to be known to the family, as otherwise the dogs would have attacked them. This, combined with the lack of forced entry signs at any of the homes, narrowed the lines of investigation. Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine stated it was a cold-blooded crime and that the killers were still at large and armed. Efforts were made to locate the rest of the Rodens' relatives to ensure their safety. 20 investigators combed through the state, searching every road and home, and interrogated every acquaintance of the family in an attempt to uncover what happened. This only caused a wave of panic in Pike County. Such was the uncertainty that a businessman named Jeff Ruby offered a reward of $25,000 for any tip that could help the police. Neighbors hung a sign on Christopher's barn door asking, "Do you know who killed us on April 22, 2016? In January 2017, the investigation yielded its first result, though it was only a side effect. A cousin of the Rodens named Josh was arrested for substance trafficking. However, the police had already determined that the amount of marijuana grown by the Rodens was not significant enough to suggest a cartel attack. Months passed, and the agents could not even find a motive after interviewing 550 people, gathering 1,100 tips, and examining 700 pieces of evidence. On April 13, 2017, the authorities had to break the hard news, announcing in the media that they did not have sufficient evidence to make any arrests. However, the police assured that they had some leads, which they could not yet make public. Days later, on the first anniversary of the incident, a mass and a small tribute were organized, attended by various authorities. The Pike Massacre remained a topic of discussion for everyone. But by the time 2 years had passed, only the neighbors continued to show interest in the case. Not even the local press, the sheriff, or the prosecutor attended the second memorial service. It seemed the county's largest criminal investigation would be forgotten. That changed in June when an important announcement was made. The prosecutor's words proved true as he publicly stated for the first time that they were focusing on the Wagners, the family of Hannah's ex-partner. The individuals named were George, his wife Angela, both 47, and their 2 sons, George, 27, and Edward, 26, known as Jake. All lived in Peebles, 25 kilometers from where the crime occurred. By then, the Wagners had moved to Kenai, a small town in Alaska, taking with them little Sophie, who ended up in her father's custody after Hannah's death. Their reason for leaving the state was claimed to be their deep affection for the Rodens and the immense pain their deaths caused them. The prosecutor requested any information about the Wagners from the public, but it wasn't long before they returned. Running out of money, they had to move back to Ohio. As preparations for their arrest were underway, agents uncovered how the relationship between the 2 families ended in bloodshed. Jake Wagner met Hannah Roden in high school when he was 18 and she was just 13. They went to prom together and became inseparable, which also brought the 2 families closer, sharing gatherings and celebrations. When Hannah was 15, she became pregnant with Jake's child. Shortly after Sophie's birth, Jake asked her to move in with him and his family, believing it would provide a healthier environment for the child. Hannah refused, feeling this was an attempt to control her. From then on, everything went downhill, with both wanting full custody of the girl and each family fighting for their own interests. On one occasion, Jake proposed that Hannah sign a document to share custody with him and his brother. Seeing Hannah's refusal, Jake began to threaten her, texting that he would take Sophie by force if necessary, and trying to manipulate her by saying that if she truly loved her daughter, she would know she needed to live with him. According to these messages, Jake believed the Rodens could harm the little girl. These conversations continued for 2 years, with Hannah refusing to live with the Wagners. In March 2015, she decided to end the relationship with Jake, citing his abusiveness. In one of her messages, she made it clear that he had hurt her and that she was tired of being pursued by him. These violent practices were common in the Wagner family, as George had managed to gain full custody of his son by threatening the child's mother with weapons. Things worsened when Hannah announced she was expecting a second daughter. Although she denied Jake was the father, he was not entirely convinced, given their resumed relationship. Far from respecting his ex-partner's wishes, he initiated a new dispute over paternity. In December 2015, Angela Wagner hacked into Hannah's social media accounts and discovered a message on Facebook that completely enraged the family. In it, Hannah told George's ex-wife that her ex-partner's family would have to kill her before she would give them custody of her daughter. A week before the incident, the Wagners made one last attempt to convince Hannah to give Jake full custody of Sophie. Hannah refused again, and then Jake's maternal grandmother falsified a document to make this happen. During the legal process, George's father and Christopher had a heated argument about where their granddaughter would live, completely severing the relationship between the two families. It was then that the Wagners began planning the crime. In Christmas 2016, they held a vote to decide whether to kill the Roden family to gain custody of Sophie. They all agreed. For 8 months, they meticulously planned the massacre, studying the Rodens' routines, their schedules, sleep patterns, and the layout of their homes, as well as investigating their security systems. They even went to the Rodens' property to fire guns into the air to check if the noise of the shots would carry too far. Noticing the sound would give them away, George's father decided it was best to purchase parts to make homemade silencers. Angela bought athletic shoes for her husband and sons to wear on the day of the crime and to destroy afterward. She also acquired phone jammers to secretly install on the victims' devices to prevent them from calling for help. George's father arranged for a van to be used that night without being recognized. On the night of the crime, Angela stayed home with Sophie, as it was their turn for shared custody, providing a perfect alibi. George's father went to Christopher's house to lure him into a supposed drug deal. Christopher agreed and opened his door, unaware of what would follow. Authorities found evidence that Angela had purchased the athletic shoes weeks before the murder, matching a blood-stained footprint found on the floor of one of the trailers. They also confirmed she had hacked her ex-daughter-in-law's account. Inspecting the Wagners' electronic devices, agents found internet searches on parental custody, indicating a clear obsession with controlling the children. However, there also appeared to be a conflict between the two families over $3,000 for the purchase of a car. Although Angela was evidently the mastermind behind the plan, the agents were certain that Jake led the executions and that all members of the Wagner clan participated. On November 13, 2018, authorities announced the arrest of 6 individuals, the first 4 being George's father, Angela, George's son, and Jake. They were indicted by the Pike County Grand Jury on 22 counts, including 8 charges of aggravated murder, and pleaded not guilty to all charges. Jake was also charged with a sexual offense for engaging in sexual conduct with Hannah when she was 15 and he was 20. On the same day, 2 additional individuals were arrested. Though they had not participated in the murders, they were accused of perjury and obstructing justice. These were Angela's mother, Rita, 65, and George's mother, Frederica, 76. The charges against Frederica included lying about purchasing bulletproof vests for her son. Neither was sent to prison, but Frederica was monitored electronically with a GPS device. Furthermore, authorities disclosed the motive behind the crime: the custody battle over Sophie. After years of uncertainty, the trial was all that remained. In June 2019, it was proven through receipts that Frederica had purchased the bulletproof vests after the incident, leading to the withdrawal of charges against her. Rita was not as fortunate. That same year, a handwriting analysis determined she was guilty of falsifying a document for Sophie's custody. In December, she began cooperating with the prosecution to avoid prison. The rest of the Wagners remained in jail, refusing to cooperate with the case and expressing sorrow over the Roden deaths, wishing for the real killers to be imprisoned. It seemed the case would never close, and Ohio residents could never rest easy until something unexpected happened 2 years later. On April 22, 2021, the 5th anniversary of the massacre, Jake reached a plea deal with prosecutors on the condition that his family members would not face the death penalty, but instead receive life sentences. He confessed to personally murdering 5 of the 8 victims and pleaded guilty to 23 criminal charges, including 8 for aggravated murder and others for conspiracy, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. He testified that he felt compelled to kill Hannah to gain custody of his daughter and had to do the same to the rest of the Rodens, knowing they would seek revenge otherwise. He expressed deep remorse and was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Following the trial, he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution in the cases against his parents and brother. Thanks to his cooperation, authorities found the van George's father had purchased for the crime and 3 firearms the family had attempted to cut up and incinerate. These were buried in buckets of cement and hidden behind the Wagner residence's barn. A specialist managed to reconstruct the fragments to prove that the casings matched those found at the Rodens' trailers. On September 10th of that year, Angela Wagner pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, burglary, and tampering with evidence, agreeing to testify against the remaining accused individuals. In exchange, prosecutors dropped the aggravated murder charges against her, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Only those who continued to deny their involvement remained to be judged. The trial against George Wagner's son began on August 28, 2022. The prosecutor called the defendant's ex-partner to testify, who had distanced herself from the family fearing for her life. The prosecution argued that George was complicit in planning, executing, and covering up the murders. However, the young man denied having any knowledge of the crimes before, during, or after their commission, even stating that if his family had asked him to participate in such an act, he would have never agreed. After 3 months, he was found guilty of all 22 charges, including the 8 charges of aggravated murder, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, in addition to a consecutive sentence of 121 years for firearm possession. George's father was still awaiting his trial, which would not occur until February 2024. If found guilty of the same 22 charges as his son, he would face a similar fate. Despite the entire family being convicted, he continues to claim his innocence. The surviving children were placed in the care of distant relatives. Out of respect for their privacy, their whereabouts cannot be disclosed, but it is known that they are happy and safe. When asked about his father, Bentley says he is fixing cars in heaven with Jesus. The Wagners' goal was to gain custody of Sophie, claiming they would take better care of her, but in reality, they deprived her of her own mother, uncles, and grandparents. The hope is that she grows up far from her father's family, in an environment where violence is never a means to an end. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your company. If you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is Unreal True Crime. Until the next episode. Good night.
Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The story of Alyssa Bustamante. On September 27, 2020, police and several neighbors from the Florencio del Castillo community were attempting to locate a young woman named Alyssa Bustamante, who had been missing for more than 5 months. They headed to an illegal dump located in San Jeronimo de Casia in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. The first thing they spotted was a sock and a shoe, inside of which was a nail. Yendri, Alyson's mother, instantly identified the clothing and even recognized the nail. Due to the nail polish color that had been applied at her nail salon, they're failing to find any more remains of the young woman. The search party withdrew, disheartened, but not defeated. The next day, they returned to the area and ventured down to a nearby coffee plantation, located 93 meters deep into the illegal dumping ground. What they found left them completely stunned. Buried beneath the soil, moss and weeds were skeletal remains of the young woman, including vertebrae, ribs, parts of her upper limbs, pelvic bones, and a femur connected by cartilage. 8 meters from that site, they discovered a piece of fabric belonging to the pants Alyson was wearing the day she disappeared. A little further away, they found a second shoe and part of an arm. It appeared that the mysterious neighbor who had provided this information had not lied. The event had been as horrific as he had described. But how did all this happen? Alyssa Pamela Bustamante Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in the city of Cartago, Costa Rica. When she was very young, her parents divorced, and she went to live with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. They moved to the Florencio del Castillo community in the town of Ujares. Despite her family's modest economic standing, Alyson never lacked for anything. Growing up in a nurturing environment led her to become a highly sociable, friendly, and attentive young woman. Everyone who knew her adored her. She had an especially close relationship with her mother. They were like friends. Alyson would even sometimes help her mother at her nail salon. At 18 years old, Alyson led a quiet life. She attended night classes at a school which was several kilometers away from her home. In her town, it was common for young people to attend schools far from their communities, so walking through the streets was a routine part of her day. She spent most of her time with her boyfriend Harold Segura. Her days typically consisted of going from school to her boyfriend's house or meeting up with friends and family. However, this routine was shattered on March 4, 2020. At 5 p.m., Alyson left her home wearing blue jeans, a white and mustard-colored blouse, and light-colored sneakers. She took a collective bus to go to the school and traveled the 5.5 kilometers to the institution with a friend. She arrived around 6 p.m. Only she said goodbye to her friend and decided to visit her aunt who lived nearby. She arrived at her aunt's house, but no one was home. She then went to her boyfriend's house, where she met his mother, and they chatted for a while. Eventually, Harold arrived, and they spent the rest of the afternoon together until he had to leave for an errand. Seeing that it was getting dark, Alyson thought it would be best to leave as soon as possible and did not wait for her boyfriend to return to say goodbye. At 8 o'clock, Alyson walked to the bus stop that would take her home to Florencio del Castillo. 10 minutes after boarding the bus, she received a text message from Harold, who was extremely worried. He told her it would have been better if she had waited for him to accompany her home. 40 minutes later, Alyson got off at the bus stop closest to her home, but she still had a long distance to walk. The street was deserted, and the only light came from a few streetlights. Feeling somewhat anxious, Alyson began the 1.6-kilometer walk to her home. She sent a message to her mother, Yendri, asking her to meet at a bridge 500 meters away from their house as they usually did. While walking, Alyson noticed 2 men who appeared suspicious. They were heading in the same direction as her, so she quickened her pace and texted Harold, saying, "I was on the bus and just got off, and these 2 sketchy guys got off as well and are walking behind me. I'm going to speed up because I'm scared." Concerned, Harold advised her to take a taxi and promised to pay for it, but Alyson declined. She texted him that she was close to the bridge where she was supposed to meet her mother. The men began to walk faster as if trying to catch up with her. When Yendri arrived at the meeting point, there was no sign of Allison. She repeatedly called her daughter's phone, but got no answer. Distraught, Yendri returned home, hoping that Allison might have taken an alternate route and had already arrived. Upon reaching home, she found it empty. The last time Allison had been online was at 8:40 p.m. Yendri tried to contact her again, but the messages went unanswered. The next day, she officially reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. The authorities began searching for clues to Allison's whereabouts. The first lead was security footage from a camera near the bridge where Allison was supposed to meet her mother. The tape showed her walking down the street toward her home, 8:47 p.m., at some point quickening her pace before disappearing into the darkness. There were no further traces of her after that. The following day, the Judicial Investigation Organization and the Ministry of Public Security joined the search. They examined various places close to the locality, including a lake and a nearby hydroelectric dam. The case drew the attention of the community, who decided to assist the authorities in the search. While investigating the streets near Allison's home, they discovered an object that caught their attention: a pair of plasters lying on the ground. This development was strange because the police had already searched the same area on the first day and found no trace of Allison. Someone seemed to be attempting to mislead them. On March 11th, a local resident came to the police station to share something suspicious he had seen on the day of Allison's disappearance. Around 8:30 p.m., the neighbor observed Allison walking briskly down the street near the bridge. A wine-colored BMW was parked nearby and started to follow her, gradually increasing its speed before stopping in front of her. Allison spoke for a few seconds with the person inside the car and then got in. The car then sped away at high speed. Upon hearing the neighbor's account, the police took immediate action to locate the vehicle. They searched all the houses near Allison's residence. On March 25th, they found the car in one of these homes. On March 29th, the Judicial Investigation Organization announced that they had seized the car for DNA testing. They also revealed that an investigation was underway against the car's owner, a man named Nelson Sanchez Urena. The 28-year-old man was known in the neighborhood for being extremely reclusive. He hardly spoke to anyone, and when he did, he was not friendly. Locals said he came from a somewhat strange family about which not much was known. One even speculated that he was involved with regional gangs. While the police continued to gather evidence to warrant the arrest of Sanchez Urena, now the prime suspect in Allison's disappearance, another significant event occurred. On April 4th, an employee of a store near the area found Allison's identification card. This was the second item belonging to Allison that had mysteriously appeared. The search continued, with authorities believing they were getting closer to discovering Allison's whereabouts. On April 17th, the police confirmed that they had found significant clues related to Allison's disappearance in the seized car, although they did not disclose any further details. On May 1st, the Costa Rican Red Cross joined the search efforts for Allison. Despite more people joining the search team, her body still remained missing. In the following months, the police focused on investigating the prime suspect and gathering enough evidence to charge him. Finally, on September 2nd, the Judicial Investigation Organization ordered the arrest of Sanchez Urena. He was formally arrested at same day without resistance. 24 hours later, authorities revealed that they had found traces of blood in the trunk, the car that had been seized over 5 months ago. These traces were matched with DNA samples from Allison Bomia's family. The results confirmed that there was no doubt that Sanchez Urena had attacked the young woman inside his car. Realizing that there was no turning back, Sanchez Urena decided it was time to confess his crime. He requested a meeting with his lawyer to reconstruct the events for the police. On March 4, 2020, Sanchez Urena was driving his car when he saw Allison walking quickly down the street. He offered her a ride home, claiming it was late and that two nearby strangers looked suspicious. Trusting him, Allison got into the car, but once inside, Sanchez Urena attacked her and forced her into the trunk of the vehicle. He then took her to a coffee plantation. Once there, he forced her out of the car and took her about 140 meters from the entrance of the property, where no one could hear them. After reaching the secluded spot, he struck her, causing an injury that left her unconscious. Blood splattered on the ground as he proceeded to assault her. After completing the horrific act, he walked back to where he had left his car, put Allison's body in the front seat, and tied her hands with a piece of cloth and adhesive tape. He then placed her back in the trunk of the car. Next, Sanchez Urena drove to an illegal dumping ground and took Allison, who was still unconscious, out of the trunk. Without hesitation, he threw the body into a coffee plantation approximately 450 meters deep to ensure that she would remain there undetected. The police subsequently ordered 6 months of preventive detention for the main suspect. That same day, they went to the illegal dumping ground to search for Allison's body. Dozens of volunteers who had been following the case on TV and were devastated by the news of her loss joined the search. On September 27, a sock and a shoe were found, which Allison's mother, Yendri, identified as belonging to her daughter. Inside the shoe was a nail that the mother instantly recognized, as she had painted it in her salon just days before her daughter's disappearance. The following day, a team of rescuers descended into a coffee plantation near the illegal dumping ground. Using safety ropes and specialized mountaineering equipment, they reached a depth of 93 meters where they found vertebrae, ribs, parts of the upper limbs, pelvis, and a femur connected by cartilage. These remains were covered in undergrowth, soil, and moss, some even fused to the ground. 8 meters from the previous site, a piece of fabric was found, belonging to the pants Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared. A second shoe and small bone fragments, which appeared to be part of an arm, were also discovered. They were unable to locate the young woman's skull. It may have rolled out of sight due to its shape. The remains were taken to a laboratory to verify if they match Allison's DNA. Forensic experts found that the body had fractures in the thoracic spine and ribs, which were consistent with the injuries caused by the fall, as described by the suspect. This indicated that they were dealing with a premeditated murder. Although Yendri, Allison's mother, was utterly devastated by the loss of her daughter, she found some solace in knowing that Sanchez Urena would spend the rest of his life in jail. During a press conference, Yendri's lawyers stated that they would do everything possible to ensure the murderer faced the full extent of the law, serving as many years in prison as possible. While they couldn't bring Allison back to life, they could seek justice on her behalf. As they awaited the start of the legal process, Allison's family held a funeral. On March 1, 2021, Sanchez was officially charged with homicide. On April 30, the criminal court ordered his trial and extended his pretrial detention by another 4 months to prevent any escape attempts. While the case had made significant progress, the most challenging part remained, gathering enough evidence to prove the act was premeditated. Yendri testified that Sanchez Urena had previous encounters with Allison. On one occasion, Allison had gone to pick up her cousins from the bus stop and met the suspect. The man offered them a ride home, which they accepted despite the awkward silence during the trip. Days later, Allison received a message on Facebook from Sanchez Urena, asking if she disliked him. Allison replied that she didn't, as they had never spoken, and she didn't know him well enough to form an opinion. The man tersely acknowledged her response. This demonstrated a long-term obsession with Allison, as he even claimed to be deeply in love with her and envious of those she spent time with. However, during the trial, the defendant completely changed his version of events. He claimed innocence and said his previous statements were made under police pressure and torture. Nevertheless, there was no turning back. The body was found where he initially indicated, and DNA evidence in the car directly implicated him. Alyson's family provided their testimony in a separate room, as they did not want to face the attacker. Despite this, Sanchez Urena continued to plead innocent. On the morning of August 18, 2021, he was officially sentenced to 18 years in prison for simple homicide. He was acquitted of the abuse charge due to the state in which Alyson's body was found, making it impossible to prove. The family was dissatisfied with the sentence, calling for up to 35 years in prison, which is customary in such cases. The verdict was later annulled by the Criminal Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice, and the case was reopened to determine if the crime involved premeditation. In November 2021, the appeals court rejected the family's claims and upheld the original sentence. As of today, the case remains open, and Alyson's family is pushing for the crime to be reclassified as aggravated homicide and for a review of the sentence. Yendri, Alyson's mother, has not only had to cope with the horrific loss of her daughter, but also with cyberbullying. Dozens of people found her Facebook profile and posted messages on her wall, blaming her for Alyson's death because she had allowed her daughter to walk alone at night. Local residents came forward in various meetings to say that it's entirely normal for young people in the region to walk long distances from bus stops to their homes. Alyson's boyfriend has given several interviews, expressing his outrage over what happened. He mentioned that Alyson had many dreams and goals, which Sanchez Urena took away from her. Despite this, he felt grateful for the 1 year and 10 months he had spent with her, stating that she will always be his angel and the best life partner he could have ever had. Although the investigation has technically closed, several questions remain. The family's lawyer has pointed out that it is quite strange for Sanchez Urena to have moved Alyson's body to the bottom of a landfill without any help. There is also the mystery of who the men were who had been pursuing Alyson on the day of her disappearance, which prompted her to get into the car of her former neighbor. After an audio message that Alyson sent her boyfriend went viral, the public has one burning question. Did these two men have anything to do with Sanchez Urena's sinister plan? And if not, why were they following the young woman late at night? The trial concluded too quickly, leaving the family dissatisfied with the sentence. They hope that, in the future, such cases will receive the necessary attention so that all those involved face the appropriate penalties. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your time and for being part of this community. If you haven't subscribed yet, I cordially invite you to do so. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. Good night.